Today is set aside to honor moms. To you children, let me ask you a question. Why do you honor your parents? Why do you honor your parents? To you adults, why would you honor your parents? And when does that command stop? Our scripture text this morning is found in Deuteronomy chapter 5 and in Ephesians chapter 6. Deuteronomy, you remember, was the giving of the law the second time. Because you remember in Exodus chapter 20, they had given the law to Israel, and then they had that issue where God said, okay, it's time to go into the land. And they said, oh, no, there's too many giants in that land. There's too many difficulties in that land. We're not going to go into that land. And God said, okay, you won't go into the land. And for 40 years, they basically walked in circles. And when the last one died, all of their children went into the land, and they conquered the land. So before they went into the land, 40 years after the first giving of the law, we read Deuteronomy, where Moses is now going over the law with the new generation. And there we read in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16, honor thy father and thy mother, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee, that thy days may be prolonged, and that it may go well with thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Then we read in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and thy mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. I don't know if you picked up on it. The Apostle Paul was quoting from Deuteronomy and from Exodus, but you notice, because he wasn't now writing to the Jews, he didn't say that it may go well with thee in the land of Israel. He now says that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. You see, of all the commandments that are given to us, every one is repeated except for one in the New Testament, which is the day that we worship, because we're given the flexibility to worship on any day, but we're not released from worshiping. We're just given the option of worshiping on whichever day the Lord places in our heart. We read that the 10 Commandments were placed on 2 tablets. How many of you could do the 10 Commandments this morning? You say, I can list off all 10. Mrs. Felber can. And yeah, there you go. Way to go, Mrs. Felber. KYB kids, I'm pretty certain you can, and I'm pretty certain if I were to lead you as adults, let's just kind of walk through them, but let's do the hand motions. You say, well, that's silly. Well, I can remember them with the hand motions, and if you can't remember them without the hand motions, then I would say my idea is better than yours. If you can remember them without the hand motions, okay. But work with me here, all right? First commandment is worship God. Or the negative is, have no other gods before me. 2, thou shalt not make any graven images. Or worship me in spirit. 3, don't take God's name in vain. Or speak the right way about me. 4, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Oh, now come on. Some of you can get your hands up a little better than what you're doing. Maybe you're doing it kind of under your jacket or whatever. 5, honor thy father and thy mother. 6, thou shalt not kill. 7, thou shalt not commit adultery. 8, thou shalt not steal. Go to jail. 9, thou shalt not bear false witness. 10, thou shalt not covet. There. You say, I don't remember those. You didn't do the hand motions. But I come back to, it was set in, the scriptures tell us, 2 tablets of stone. 1, 2. What's interesting is the command we're looking at today is the 5th commandment. The unique dignity of this commandment is that it is part of our response to God. All true authority is founded on God's authority. And the 5th commandment applies to every one of us, whether our parents are living or not. Today I want to talk about the blessing of honoring. I want to challenge your thinking based on what God says and encourage you to reach for the blessing. The honor, the blessing of honoring. So what's the rule? Let's go to Ephesians. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6, beginning at verse 2, we read, honor thy father and thy mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest live long on the earth. What I want you to notice is the first part of this in chapter 6, verse 1, is written to children. But verses 2 and 3 are written to everyone. To honor means to combine love with reverence. You really can't honor someone if you don't have love for them. It is honor that is touched with emotion. There can be no true honor without love. God's rule is that we are to honor our father and mother. Why is that? Because God says, I want you to worship me. I want you to worship me the right way. I want you to talk about me in the right way. I want you to remember to worship me regularly. I want you to worship me by submitting to my authority. Every authority is authority that has been delegated by God. Our whole society is fixed on this structure. We choose to submit to authorities that we have chosen to govern us. Some places, they don't get to choose who's going to govern them, but they do have authorities that govern them. But if you were to listen to the pledge that the King of England takes, he recognizes his authority is sovereignly given by God. our president places his hand on the Bible, it's God's book. And he says, I pledge to be true to what the Scripture, to what the Constitution says, based on God's authority. What does it mean to dishonor? Dishonor is when we reject God's authority, and it results in dishonoring authorities all over. This whole concept of honoring parents is so important to our society. Isn't it interesting? Paul in the book of Romans, chapter 1, I'm going to read verse 30. Paul is saying, people who choose to say, I will not acknowledge God. He says, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart became dark. They couldn't see. So what did they do? They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and it says, God said, okay. So he gave them up, the scripture says, to vile affections. And then he goes on to describe, instead of there being a family, now there is people that say, oh, I'm not interested in someone of the opposite sex. I'm interested in someone of the same sex. Scripture tells us where that comes from. It's when we no longer acknowledge God as God. It's not a genetic thing, it's a choice. Let me say it again. Don't be confused. People have tried to confuse you. The reality is, same-sex attraction is when we choose to not acknowledge God as the sovereign. But I digress. We come to verse 30 as he's giving a list of the things that these people do. He says, being filled with all unrighteousness. What happens when we don't acknowledge God as God? We're filled with all unrighteousness and fornication and wickedness and covetousness and maliciousness and envy and murder and debate and deceit and malignity and whisperers and backbiters and haters of God and despiteful and proud and boasters and inventors of evil things and disobedient to parents. It's like, where did that come from? That seems so minor compared to all these other things, and yet it's not minor. Because you see, of all, just narrowing down 10 simple things that God said, I want you to do that bring honor to me, he said it's really important you honor your parents. Honor your parents. You know, I think of a man in the Old Testament named Absalom. Maybe some of you remember. He's the guy that had the full head of hair. He was beautiful, and he was bad. Solomon, instead of honoring his dad, Solomon chose to disrespect his dad, and Solomon chose to go his own way. He chose to say, I'm going to be king. My dad will not be king. Can you imagine? And Solomon died trying to defeat his dad. And Solomon was buried in the valley of Jehoshaphat. And you know, the Jewish children, when they go by the tomb of Absalom, spit. And they throw stones to show dishonor to this man who dishonored his dad. You see, the best way to live life is to honor your parents. And it impacts more than just so that you don't get a lot of spankings when you're growing up. Life is best lived if we honor our parents. And we'll honor our parents differently in the various stages in which we live. What does pre-adult honor look like? Let's start with little kid honor. Little kid honor, according to Ephesians chapter 6, is to obey. You obey your parents. That's what it means to honor them when you're little. When you're living with your parents. And why do you obey your parents? Because they're always right? No. Parents will tell you we're not always right. Because they have superior wisdom and moral integrity? Not always. Some of you have grown up with parents, neither one of those would be true. Why do you obey your parents? Because God said to. It's right. Now, if we were to read on, we'd see verse 4. It talks about how parents should treat children. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about honor. And I want you to notice something. He says, I want you to obey your parents not because they are some super person, but because Jesus asks you to. And it's right. That's why you honor your parents. That's why you obey your parents, because it's right. How much do you know about Jesus from the age of 0 to the age of 30? How much do you know about him? Not a lot. We read at the end of Luke chapter 2, when Jesus was about 12, he was near manhood. He was near that bar of becoming recognized as a man. He's in the temple. He is talking with all of the religious people. He's debating the scriptures with them. Imagine that as a 12-year-old. And Jesus' parents come and they say, son, what are you doing here? You need to be with us. Why did you embarrass us? Why did you leave us? And Jesus said, well, didn't you know I'd be about my Father's business? But then you know what Jesus did? He went home with them and submitted to them. And the thing we know about Jesus for the first 30 years of his life was he honored his mom and dad. Jesus kept all the law. Jesus didn't ever sass them. Jesus didn't rebuke them. You know, how did Jesus teach you how to enjoy life? Remember in Matthew chapter 5, he said, blessed are the meek. Those that are under the control of those that are in authority over them. All of a sudden we begin to realize, as children, the command is to obey with a proper attitude. Paul writing to these Christians, these first 3 verses are written about parental relationships. Verse 1 specifically for children. Obey because it's right. You're going to be tempted. You're going to say, well, but sometimes I just don't feel like listening to mom and dad. I don't feel like doing what they say. I just want to give them a piece of my mind. That doesn't ever work out well. It's never right to dishonor your parents. As a child, it's never right to disobey. Do you ever disobey? Probably. I did. Go ahead, ask me, how'd that work out for you? Not so good. I'm not talking about the times I got spankings. I'm just talking about whenever I disobeyed my parents, it didn't go well. Why? Because it wasn't right. To you children, if there's one thing you could pick up today, it's this. Always remember, trust Jesus and obey your parents. Trust Jesus and obey your parents. What's it look like for a young adult? In our culture, as children become teenagers, they should be applying what they've been learning. They should be learning as a young adult to think and to apply what they've been taught. So what would honoring look like for you? Mark Twain said this. He said, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to 21, I was amazed at how much he had learned in 7 years." You know, as a young person, the temptation is to become independent. The temptation is to look down on your parents because maybe they aren't dressing the way all the really cool people are dressing. And all these young adults, teenagers, early 20s, and they've got all these special fads and all these special new language that they speak. The temptation is to become independent, but the key here is to become interdependent. As you begin to recognize, and as your parents begin teaching you how to live and function in the world, that you need to do right. Proverbs 15, verse 5 says, "A fool despises his father's instruction, but he that regardeth reproof is prudent." Despises has the idea of casting off as worthless. Oh, my parents said that, but they don't know what they're talking about. When we refuse to listen to our parents, it keeps us from maturing and becoming wise. We're just kind of in this loop of never growing up. Sometimes you hear the Peter Pan syndrome. Sometimes you hear that people just have never learned to adult. It's what they're describing. We have a society of people who've never learned how to adult. They've never learned how to provide. They've never learned how to use wisdom. A wise teacher, a wise teenager learns from his parents' instruction. I was fascinated by this story. There was a young man who decided he was going to be a sailor. And he was going to be a midshipman. As he got to the boat, he had already loaded his sea chest, and he turned around and he saw his mom crying. He paused and he said, "Get my trunk. I will not go and break my mother's heart." George, said his mother, "God has promised to bless the children who honor their parents, and I believe that he will bless you. You know this man as the first president of the United States, George Washington." You say, well, you've got to be a man. You've got to get out in the world. Yes, you do. But you do that learning from your parents. In adulthood, honoring is learning to treasure your parents. Love, respect, and caring. You know, we grow in right relationships as we learn and reflect on honoring. Grandchildren are the reward to grandparents, but parents are the pride of their children. Both of these statements speak of mutual honoring and treasuring. Making our parents our treasure speaks of how we value them. Learning to appreciate our parents. Adjusting to their needs. Honor thy father and thy mother. As I was growing up and I was in my 30s and I was busy working and parenting myself, my parents were in pretty good health. But then my mom wasn't. Life changed. Having a parent with cancer causes you to rethink some things. During that time, it also reminded me, though, of how when I got married, two became one. My wife did much for my mom. Now that my mom has passed, I wish we could have done more. My dad was in great health for so long. I just sent Cindy a video this morning of all the just snapshots of pictures through the years of every place my dad went with us. My dad used to go on vacation. Whenever we went, my dad was going to go with us. I'm so glad he did. Because now he's gone. But we have those memories. And we have his influence, not only in my lives, but my children's lives. But as our parents grow older, they're going to need some things. You say, I don't have time to do this. Honor your father and mother so that things will go well with you and you'll live long. That's the promise. That's what God says. All of a sudden now, as I would say, Cindy and I are in the strength of our lives still. Maybe we're a little over the top of the hill, but we're still doing pretty well. We're not having any physical issues, and then all of a sudden you realize, but Cindy's parents are 25 years older than us. We live in Fargo. They live in Memphis. I'm so thankful. Cindy's sister lives there with them, but sometimes it means we need to do our part. Is it convenient? Probably no more than when I had bad diapers and we were out in public and my mom had to deal with it. Probably no more than when I was 3 or 4 and had a lot more energy than I should have when we were where we were. But my parents just dealt with it. You see, the older we get, the more we realize what our parents have done for us. As we grow between our youthfulness and our parenting, we recognize the great sacrifices our parents have made for us. As they are going through what they're going through, we're probably going to be going through some of the busiest days of our lives. So, what do you do? It means appreciating them, valuing them, communicating with them, and ministering to their needs. Honor your father and your mother. It may mean a change of housing. You see, Paul's simple admonition was, honor your father and mother. And he says, but that's the first commandment with promise. It'll go well for you. I'm amazed how many people in our society today do not honor their parents, and if you sit back and you watch their life trajectory, it doesn't go well for them. Wealthy, famous, washouts. We see this pattern over and over and over again. What's the problem? We're not following what the Scripture says. Honoring is an attitude accompanied by actions. It says, you are worthy. Why is this so important? Parents are the most influential relationship we will ever have. For the most part, our personalities, our behavior patterns, our relational styles are all set by the age of 6. We don't like to think about how important this brief time is, but it is so important in the lives of our children. And yet, those are some of the busiest years in our lives. The truth is, the parents are the most influential relationship to the children. Who we are is largely because of our parents. So the way we respond to our parents shapes the way I'm going to respond to others, and particularly those that are in authority over me. When I fight my parents and I resist their authority and do not honor them, I tend to react the same way with others. If you're constantly getting called from the school saying your kids aren't obeying, maybe you ought to pause and just say, what am I doing? And what's happening in my home? We tend to react the same way. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. With YouTube, you can watch an unlimited number of people that when they get pulled over by the police, they do not submit to any authority in their life. They get pulled over for something simple and they end up going to jail. Why? Because they will not submit. Our parents represent the first and most important line of God-given authority. And our response to our parents is our way of showing honor to God, even as adults. Why is my life longer when I obey and honor my parents? Well, I mean, there's the practical reason that if you don't submit to the authorities around you, you end up crashing into things, you end up demolishing things, you end up doing really stupid things because you've never learned to submit. You know, when your parents say, who are you going to go with? Who are you going to ride with? Who's driving? Where are you going to be? You know, they're really not just trying to micromanage your life. They're trying to get you to think, is this person safe? Should I be in a car with them? I remember my dad telling me he was out with a group of guys when he was in high school. And the guys were going to stop and drink. And my dad just said, you go ahead. I'll find another way home. If I remember correctly, I believe he called my grandfather. My grandfather came and picked him up. Didn't question him, didn't chide him for being with the guys. He just said, good decision. That you may live long in the land which God gave. To the Israelites, this was society structure. If the family structure blew apart, they would not survive in the land. And in fact, you find that's exactly what happened to Israel. Their family structure blew apart, and they didn't survive on the land. Yet we read of things like that here in our society. There were 8 teenage girls in Bartow, Florida, that beat up another 16-year-old girl. And the parents blamed society for the way their children were. You know, parenthood is honorable. There are few occupations that are as valuable as parenting. We should view our relational impacts as more valuable than our vocational relationships. Just something to think about. The world has said you got to keep working, you got to do this, you got to be away from your family, and we'll reward you for that. But what are they really giving you? In our modern society, extended family units are neglected. Parents are not really thought of. I hope it's not that way for you, but possibly it's becoming more like that just as you've gotten busy. So how do you work with this? First of all, become honorable parents. Behave with integrity in home and at work. Model respect for your parents to your kids. Have a healthy attitude toward other authority figures, and treat authority figures as those under you with respect. Kids model what they see. I would encourage you, even as you talk about elected officials, choose how you will speak of them, because you are modeling for your children how they will speak of you. Probably you're like I am. I probably get 10 texts a day telling me how bad the opponents are on the other side, and therefore I need to give money to help this person win. And when that's the kind of text that I get, I recognize my side doesn't look so good. Express your appreciation to your parents. Sounds simple, but you children, when's the last time you told your parents thanks? When was the last time you said, I really enjoyed the meal, or thank you for preparing the meal that I didn't enjoy, but it was really a lot of work and I'm grateful? Possibly some of you were neglected, abandoned, or abused. You ask the question, so what can I do to get where I ought to be when I've got this kind of a baggage with my heritage? Begin by determining you're going to honor your parents, not because they have earned it, but because God says you ought to. You submit to God's authority and you say, God, you've placed this one in my life. I don't understand it, but I will honor them. I will love them and I will care for them because you tell me to. You know, the whole goal is I just want to be in line with God today. The blessing of honoring. You know, one other thing maybe for those that have gone through difficult times, and that is practice forgiveness. Instead of following feelings, use forgiveness. You don't have to feel forgiveness. You can grant it. If you put your feelings in front of forgiveness, it's like putting the cart before the horse. It just doesn't work. Maybe you just need to admit your unwillingness or your inability to forgive. Start with that. And then grant forgiveness. I was challenged by this recently, and I appreciated this thought, and that is, sometimes the person that needs forgiveness doesn't want forgiveness. You ever experienced that, where that person, they need to ask you for forgiveness and they don't want forgiveness. They don't want to ask you for it. What do? You can still release that person to God. Say, God, you take care of this. Whatever you choose to do. I hope the best for them, but I give it to you. But they mistreated you. Yes. Give it to God. Just release it. Now, it won't restore the relationship because you can't restore what the other person doesn't want restored. But you don't have to carry that baggage and you don't have to be trapped. And then ask God how you can show honor to your parents. Just ask God, Lord, what's one thing I could do to show honor to my parents today? Choose to speak good things about them. And ask the Lord to put a check on your thoughts and on your words. What's the reward? The reward is it will drive you closer to the Lord. You see, it doesn't really matter what kind of parents you had. When you do what Scripture says, it will bring you closer to the Lord. There are blessings. So, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest live long on the earth. What can you do? First of all, do something special for your parents. Doesn't have to be expensive, but do something intentional. Encourage your parents to tell your children about when they were young. Begin to connect the generations. FaceTime with them if they're a long way away. Last couple of Christmases, we've been a long way from family. And Cindy and I were worn out by the end of the day because we were FaceTiming almost from about, 10 till 2, 3. That's a lot of time on the phone. Honor your parents in spite of the mistakes they may have made. Ask their advice and listen. Take your children to see them. Discuss ways to care for them as they age. Model respect to them for your children. Call and thank them for the sacrifices they've made in raising you. Because let's be honest, it probably wasn't a cakewalk. Tell them they are valuable and that you are praying for them. The blessing of honoring. I could have preached out of Proverbs 31, ladies. I thought maybe you'd like a break. I thought maybe we all just needed the reminder to be grateful for those that have ministered grace to us. Possibly imperfectly, but they did minister. And for that, each of us are thankful.